Welcome back, everyone, to the PSYWAR podcast. It has been a brief hiatus since our last episode. We've had some personnel changeover, but we are back in the seat, ready to go and ready to kick on. On that note, I am very excited to have on the episode today two PSYOP officers, Major Will Lamb and Major Ash Holtzman. Both are currently officers serving in the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. Two people that are pretty well known within the PSYOP Regiment. Major Holtzman, I've actually known ever since I graduated the course. Yours has been a name that's floated around as someone that you can go to ask for help and advice, especially for young officers who are trying to just get their head around the job.
Historical facts as well.
And historical facts.
And also like facts that no one really cares about except for me. Yeah. It's good to be here.
Oh, yeah.
And then Major Lamb, also well known within the regiment. Both have been able to do great things. Major Lamb, most recently known for being a huge contributor, if not the almost like major driving force in the recent Ghost in the Machine video, which from my standpoint has just been really cool to see, because rarely, if ever, have I found something that I think almost universally throughout the PSYOP regiment do you find people that sort of go, I'll hang my hat on that. I'd like to, that's pretty cool. And this video has been something that obviously is put out and caused, some buzz and things, but it's something that as a PSYOPer, it's something that you just kind of love to see. So
yeah, cool. Well, thanks, Colin. I appreciate that.
So because of your current positions, because of the reputation that you both have, and then also looking back at some of the past podcasts, one thing that has been really, really interesting to viewers and to listeners has been, I think because so many people who listen to this, there are members in the active force, obviously, but then there's a lot of people who are prospective PSYOPers. They're not even in the branch yet, but they're really interested in what this branch is. They hear about it at certain briefs, and so they then do a quick Google search, and that's how they find out about it. And so that first step of getting into the branch, going through the qualification course, the PSYOP assessment and selection, people are always wanting to find out what they can to be able to succeed in things like that. And so both of you are in positions where you're close to that qualification course. And that's really what we're hoping to be able to talk through today, is that qualification course, what it looks like, how it's changed for some of us in the PSYOP regiment now versus 5 years ago or 3 years ago, why it's changed, and things like that. So
That's a lot. Let's do it all. Let's do it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So Will and I are both currently at what we like to refer to as SWCC, but which is actually named the United States Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. Fun fact, it used to be called the Psychological Warfare Center back in the day. So we like to flex on that. That's actually why when you see the SWCC symbol, it has a knight's head on it, and it has the three PSYOP colors that used to be used as a descriptor for psychological warfare: black, gray, and white. Right off the bat, there you go. There's your historical facts.
So maybe we could kick this off this way, right? I just spent the last year doing recruiting, right? Trying to take something that's pretty intangible, right? Which is PSYOP, intangible thing. How do you sell that, right? And a lot of those people that we recruited are in our course now, right?
Yeah.
So kind of an interesting launching point is why do certain people get into PSYOP and why do others not?
absolutely. And actually I sort of introduce you guys, but really I'd love to have you guys sort of maybe even self-introduce what your time in PSYOP has kind of been like, maybe some rewarding points. But again, going back to who's, really wants to listen and find out about PSYOP more, it's those prospective members. And really, it's always just interesting to find out what was it that sort of initially drew your attention to PSYOP? Was there one thing? Was it a number of things that sort of went, that just sort of feels like it's, sort of right up my alley?
Right. Well, I can kick us off. I'm classically trained as a signal officer, so a communications officer. When I left the schoolhouse, I got hooked up with an assignment down at 1st Special Forces Group out in Fort Bliss, Washington. I was a signal detachment commander, which I think was probably the best signal job in the Army. It was really good. And so when I got in, the battalion was just getting back from Afghanistan. It was a pretty rough rotation for them. Someone in the 3 shop. I was a second lieutenant at a Special Forces Group. So if you can imagine like what that looked like and how that played out for me is exactly how it happened. I'm not going to say I got bullied, but it was, to say that I got humbled is probably putting it lightly.
Yeah, in special operations, the lieutenants are actually captains. So like, that's not really a part of our advertising.
In the game of like rock, paper, scissors, I was a mushroom. So like people would look at me and be like, whoa, like I have not seen one of you in a decade. Like, where did you come from? Like, who are you? Yeah. So that was my opener there, right? So they have what's called a Menton Ball. It's a yearly thing the group does. They said, hey, we need you to make a video for this big social event. It's the first time the battalion's going to get back together. Lieutenant, you're going to make it. And they did that without knowing that I have a background in video, and I'm super into it. So put a lot of time into it. So I put this thing together. I play it out of command and staff. I'm sitting in the back. It's dark. It's got clips of Ronald Reagan from the 80s from one of his big, magnificent speeches and some rousing music. All the images of all the ODAs in Afghanistan. It was like super intense. I end it with Johnny Cash. He had a record that he released later in his life called Won't Back Down. And it's a very like soulful, stripped down kind of ballad, right, to the kind of man that I would think a Green Beret would be, right, or would look up to. So I use that as the closer in this video. And so we're all watching it. The last, twinge from his guitar, rings out in that conference room. They're silent for like 5 seconds. The battalion commander turns around and looks at me and he says, "Did you make that?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "You're going to do this from now on." So, so I was the video guy at the battalion. And so that kind of grew and evolved. And when it came time for my window to apply, I had another battalion commander. He reached out and I said, "Hey, Will, I think you should try out for PSYOP because I think you'd be good at it, just based on your passion for media and what you've done for the battalion in the last 2-3 years." And so that was the route. That was the route that I took.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, so when I was a cadet, right, they were like, "Hey, cadet, as an officer, you're not going to make movies, right?" And I was like, "Watch me." And I've literally done that. I made the joke behind every like award, promotion, anything. There's a video there that I've maybe placed strategically, right?
Oh, I love
to put
it.
myself in good favor. But yeah. So if I have to thank somebody for getting me to PSYOP, it's former President Ronald Reagan, Johnny Cash,
And all those SF guys.
and all those SF guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
Ronald Reagan, who was a former actor himself, if only he knew that he would not only motivate in so many ways, but also his legendary acting career would also.
Well, a former actor and member of the first motion picture unit, one of our predecessors as the PSYOP Regiment. So,
historical fact number 2.
Yeah, historical fact number 2. Yeah, during the Second World War, that's what he did. It was a way to part of the conflict and also stay in Hollywood, but also hedge your bets, but contribute to the war effort.
So cool factoid. I'm reading a book called The Jaws Log by Carl Gottlieb. He's one of the screenwriters on it. We use Jaws frequently as sort of a teaching metaphor in the Ghost in the Machine video because I think it says a lot about what a production can achieve when there are certain constraints. And as I'm reading this book, it turns out it's basically like a behind the scenes documentary, like you would see in a DVD thing, but written in the 70s for a movie that Spielberg made when he was 26, right? And what was crazy is like in the opening few pages, I highlighted it like immediately. He was in the Army and he was stationed down at Fort Leonard Wood, which is where if you're a 37 X-ray, you're coming into our pipeline, you start your career at Fort Leonard Wood.
Oh, wow.
Right? And then he was in the Army himself. So it was kind of a cool
That is cool.
cool happenstance, yeah.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Major Holtzman, what about yourself?
Oh yeah, so mine. Before I even went to school, in high school, I had taught myself how to draw, and that was for those who know me, I'm a very obsessive person, and once I kind of latch on to something, I kind of don't stop. It's hard for me to stop. So I taught myself how to draw. I was very convinced that was going to be my career. I was going to be a graphic illustrator of some kind, and then I just latched on to this idea of going to West Point, and then that became my thing that drove me to the end of high school. I actually didn't get in the first time I applied, and I got in the second time. So I was a year behind everyone, but I got there, and I'd done really well in high school, but I did not do well at West Point. And I was surrounded by people who did really well in high school, right? And so I was totally convinced while I was there that I was going to be a terrible officer. And so I kind of also embraced that. I didn't not take it seriously. I did take, especially during summer training and all that stuff. I was relatively good at the summer training and being in shape and all those things. But academically, I struggled. And in my free time, I made what was called spirit videos. So I was a video nerd.
There we go.
And I made a lot, enough so that I was not. I don't want to say that I was known and make it sound like that was a good thing. I was known, but for all the wrong reasons. And I was just that guy who's oh man, is he going to make it through the academy? He's just making videos. And people would pull me to the side and they would say what Will was told, you realize that Cadet Holtzman, you're not going to make anything like this in the Army. And I was man, do I want to be in the Army? But it was too late. I was there. I had had to finish. And like I majored in sociology while I was there because I found it really interesting. Little known fact about the academy is if you major in sociology, it's like the closest thing to majoring in the arts that you can get there, because I went to like red carpets and stuff. A lot of people make films that are about sociological concepts, documentaries and stuff. But also because West Point being West Point, there was a few relationships there. So like I got to walk a red carpet for Spike Lee's movie, A Miracle at Santa Ana. And that was like really wild. There's like a picture of me and Spike Lee, and I met Martin Scorsese, and like there's like all these weird things that happened to me. And because I was a video nerd, I would get pinged when we had VIPs come in. And so like I met Michael Uslan. That's probably no one knows who. I was
going to say who is.
So Michael Uslan is the single executive producer for every single Batman movie that's ever been. So 1989 Batman and on, to include the animated Batman movies like Mask of the Phantasm and stuff. Like this dude's like a huge deal, and like I just got to like spend a whole day with him, like this big deal who's bankrolled the entirety of Batman's film career, right? And like I just got to ask him a lot of questions, and like I was like so fascinated by this, and that didn't help me, right? I was like, I'm gonna make movies when I'm gonna spend the minimum amount of time in the Army. I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna make movies. There's a few West Pointers in the film industry. I'm just going to link up with them, and like I'll be their PA, and I'll learn the ropes, and then I'll do my own. And spoiler alert, that didn't happen for a variety of reasons, right? So the biggest reason being I found PSYOP. I was force branched field artillery because my class rank was, as we've discussed, not great. Then I wanted to go OCONUS, so I was actually able to pick Korea. I did that intentionally. I was born in Asia, so it was like an opportunity to go back to Asia and kind of like get reacquainted with like my earlier life. And I went to Korea, and it was a good experience overall. I had really good troops. The field artillery was okay to me, but at the same time, like I was just looking around myself, and like I was not a field artilleryman. Like at my core, I was like something else, and I felt like I could continue being successful, but my heart wasn't in it. And so I dropped the special operations packet in general. I didn't drop a PSYOP packet. I didn't know what PSYOP was. I wish I could say that like I found PSYOP. No, like I happened into it, and PSYOP like found me.
What was your first? Did you have like a first engagement with PSYOP ever, where you're like, oh, that's PSYOP?
Did you at least see that there was maybe some sort of a media component that it might be?
No, I had no idea. I had no idea. Like my whole career has been an accident, 100%. I probably shouldn't have graduated the academy. I probably shouldn't have gotten in. My whole career is just, yeah, man, it's wild. It's a wild ride. I've done all right for myself in this career field. I've been pretty lucky in that I've been exposed to a lot. So I deployed 4 times in 4 years as a captain. I was kind of in the tail end of the global war on terror, where that was happening. 6 months on, 6 months off, 6 months on, 6 months off. And man, it was kind of rough, especially ask my wife. Like it was kind of rough for our family and everything. But we got through it, and it made us stronger. And man, every deployment was completely different, and that's what's kind of kept me in the regiment. Is like what we get applied to is the range fan. In other soft tribes, their specialty and what they do is usually very specific. Like the left and right limits are very narrow, and I do this, and they're an expert in that, and that's awesome. We need that. But for PSYOP, like our range fan is like wider than anything else in the Army. Yeah. And it's like, what are you supposed to be applied towards? It's like, well, that's a good question. What do you want? What's your mission, and what are you doing? Because I could probably help.
When I was on outreach in the last year, I took kind of a tour around to all of our different outstations to see teams, interview people, understand their experience. And what struck me, from continent to continent globally, like every mission it's like completely different, but it's also at the same time still very much the same shared experience, which I think is pretty unique to PSYOP.
It is. Like you talk to a ranger, and they can describe what sounds like a pretty common experience from ranger to ranger, even the ones in Washington vice the ones at Benning.
Right.
Like this is what it's like to be a ranger. That comes back to like branding for us, right? Some of the difficulty has been there is no single universal experience for a PSYOPer. If you talk to one of us, you've talked to one of us. And unfortunately, all of our careers are just completely different. You will continue to probably be in roles where you can apply your filmmaking background.
Right.
Similarly, I'll be able to continue applying, so I got really into history, and especially became very obsessed.
We know how into it you are.
Very obsessed with the history of PSYOP.
Yeah, that's
because
good.
one of my frustrations when I went through the pipeline was I kept raising my hand and asking if there's a book about this. How can I learn more about that? Because at that time, I didn't feel the Q course was providing any of the context that I wanted. I wanted examples. Like,
Right, yeah.
okay, you're telling me I could do anything, but your example of doing anything is like the same thing over and over again. Like they taught us about leaflets and billboards, and I was like, mass media, that's all we do? Really? Well, you could do anything. You could do anything. But then they want to give us an example.
Right.
And so that's something that I've put a lot of effort into in the Q, especially the last 6 months where I was on the tail end of my command, now your command, right? Where I injected as much history as I could so that they have examples now.
So then both of you have these interesting sort of backgrounds where you've done things that you find out years later apply to the job, apply to, whether it's media or graphic artistry and the sociology. But both of you sort of said that you had these moments where people said, you won't be able to do this, and there's so many different ways to do things. Does that make it hard? Like going back to the idea of, we have our qualification course, does that make it hard to select individuals, or does it mean that anybody can kind of succeed in the field, like despite their background?
It's actually a really great question, segue, Colin, to the qualification course in its current iteration. I mean, so the course is, and we tell our students this, right? It teaches the fundamentals. Really, they could be taught to anybody, right? Ash, you spent about a year here. You've seen the caliber of student that comes out of our selection course and into the qualification course. How would you say, what kinds of attributes would you say that we're looking for?
So this is an interesting point because as soon as I got into the job, I actually started deep diving MOSs and backgrounds and all of that stuff. And something we found was that there is no correlation between what anyone majored in college, as far as officers, and previous MOS experience.
Right.
So I thought that was fascinating because we had a nuclear engineer just go through, and he did really well. We've also had marketing majors who've done amazing. At the end of the day, what we see out of students who are successful and then also in the force is things like adaptability. Are you comfortable with the unknown? Is that a place where you're going to start freaking out, yelling at people,
right,
complaining to your chain of command, like, I need more information? Like,
as our former first sergeant used to say,
oh yeah,
be comfortable being uncomfortable. Right?
Exactly, man. And if you're that kind of person who's like adaptable under pressure, like not a high stress, high strung individual, but someone who can, okay, I'm in a stressful situation, I can stay calm, and I need to be creative right now. If you're that person, you're that person. And that's something that we do our best to find, but we also do our best to teach. Some individuals have to recycle, and that's okay. Some individuals shouldn't recycle, and they end up getting released from the pipeline because there's nothing worse, as much as it is injury to the ego, right, than having someone in the regiment that doesn't fit there. And it's nuanced. There is a line there of like, if someone's not adaptable, if someone's peered really low by their peers in the sense that they can't work with a team, that's usually why. Like someone who's going to exert levels of power when they're given power inappropriately, right? There's nothing worse than a young captain who thinks they're God's gift to, etc., downrange, and they just take full control over everything, and they take the mission in whatever direction they want it to take instead of what direction it probably should take. I would say those are like patterns we observe with our students, but at the end of the day, there's simply no such thing as a one-size-fits-all PSYOPer. I think that's what makes us who we are. We're all different. That's our superpower.
Right. I remember my selection experience being a real good test of like what I have up here, like in my mind, right? But at the same time, we still have physical gates, right? And personally, I kind of wrestle with the idea of physical gates a little bit. We recycle a student, or a student is sent home, and it's, what if they're the next Einstein, but because they couldn't pass a ruck march, what are we leaving on the table, right? And so I kind of wrestle with that. I was actually thinking about that on the drive in, because when we deploy around the world, you got to be a problem solver, right? And that's any kind of problem. So in this case, it's just physical, right? So if you're not good at rucking 12 miles, right? Set the conditions to pass. It's not hard, right? It's harder for other people. But I think, failure is only important if you learn from it. If the student's coming across 12 miles at 3 hours and 5 seconds, they still didn't pass, right? To borrow a quote from the cinema, right? Aim small, miss small. The amount of students we have that fail at 3 hours and 30 seconds, 3 hours and 45 seconds, I think that tells the whole story, right? And for me, if it were me, if I saw that clock tick past 3 hours and then I knew I was going to have 3 months to prepare again, like, I'm never going to let that happen again, right? Like, I would just like hit that shame bell, you know? I'm going to do everything I can to pass after getting recycled, right? I think that's a good thing, right? If you can self-assess, figure out, hey, what do I got to do next time to succeed, to get rid of this problem, right? Because if you can't solve this problem, which is wholly you, how can we expect you to solve a far more sophisticated problem overseas, you know, with a whole lot of pressure and attention on you?
Absolutely. Right? So we do have some data that suggests in SWIC, especially for PSYOP, that physical failures correlate to academic failures. The data was enough that we were able to justify putting all of our physical events up front now, where they occur in the beginning so that we don't spend too much time on an individual who isn't going to pass those gates and have them exposed to the academic stuff. They need to kind of proof that they can be dedicated to something enough to pass this physical assessment. And to be fair, what we're asking the PSYOP students to do is what we ask other people in the Army to do. So rucking 12 miles in 3 hours is what air assault school is. And there's plenty of privates who have air assault badges. There's a whole division, right? The 101st, the majority of them have air assault badges. It's a very doable standard to maintain. Running 5 miles in 45 minutes, that's 5 more minutes than the Rangers get. And it's a very doable thing. Simultaneously, we're not asking people to max the PT test. Our standard is to literally pass, not get 70% and everything. It's no, can you pass? Just pass to standard. Like, the push-ups aren't insane, none of that, but can you pass? What we have seen at SWIC is there are sometimes a small percentage of individuals who will fail one of those things, and they will have roughly 3 months to retrain themselves. They'll be given 2-a-day exercise programs, but at the end of the day, they can't bring themselves to commit extra or whatever it is, right? There's all sorts of extenuating circumstances. It's like a personal choice. It's like you said, like, if you went through that, you would have internalized that and then pushed yourself so that you would then achieve it the next time. And that's kind of like a special operations mentality.
Oh yeah.
And that's what we want out of our students, is not for like these physical things to be a barrier. It should be just a check in the box.
That's good. The course, though, recognizes that, and then also has ways, like you're talking about, coming back 3 months later and still being able to maybe have that chance. Because I think it's something I've wrestled with too, is that, you know, at the end of the day, if you give me a guy who looks like Thor or a person who can like think like Loki or something, I actually kind of want the second
Nice
guy
analogy.
a little bit. I want the guy who can think outside the box and really bring, you know, a solution that, you know, is, again, it might be unorthodox, but it's going to be effective in things.
So everyone can understand some context too. We are in the process of being reviewed. So there is a review occurring at SWIC, directed by the Commanding General, and then being trumpeted by the Fullbirds, to see what physical assessments should be used in all of the pipelines. Like, does it actually matter that a special forces person can do sit-ups? Like, when are they going to do a sit-up in combat? That's like a real conversation that's happening right now. So in the future, it might completely change for the PSYOP regiment as well. Currently, the documents that we have to support are those documents that and those standards I just described. And it's not like it's a secret. We aren't hiding it from anyone.
Right. So I think that's a good point, and I think it makes me think, you know, how one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys on was also to talk about how the current Q course is different, how it's sort of changed, how it sort of sees those, you know, do we really need this skill set? Do we really need this? So then you adapt. And so that's, I guess my question is, I went through the Q course about 5 years ago, but even I know 2 years ago, I was hearing things that I didn't experience when I went through. And now, just recently, I was able to, you know, kind of tour the site where, you know, part of the Q course takes place. And I was like, wow, this is drastically different what I even heard 2 years ago. So
yeah.
So what does what does it look like?
So I'll
nowadays?
start very briefly on assessment selection. One thing for that I think is important to get the word out there is it is much more cognitively focused now. So this kind of gets to Will's point where he's like, talking about like, is a ruck march the way we should assess a PSYOP? Or the answer that we're drifting towards is no. Is that
Interesting.
that shouldn't be the focus? What if I miss out on the Einstein of PSYOP?
I know, it hurts.
To your point about like how's it different? When I went through assessment and selection, because I kind of told you guys I did not know what PSYOP was.
Right.
They had us raise our hands if we thought we knew what PSYOP was, and no one in my selection
It's a trap.
rose their hands. No one knew.
Yeah.
It was just one of those like, I have no idea. I know I'm here, and I know I don't have to go back to the field artillery. That's what I know.
Yeah.
And they just like looked at us and they were like, good. That's how we like it.
When
It's just like, whoa, it's like it's a total mind shift from
Yeah.
how it used to be. That's how it used to be. We
Right.
don't talk about it.
in the course, so I went through in 2017. You went 2015?
2013.
2013. Okay. Did you have an elevator pitch as part of like a actual class instruction?
No, no.
Okay.
We just did a lot of random things.
Interesting. Okay.
And I'm not knocking.
You know, so we did. We had a
I'm
whole
not
like
here to knock like the
we
way
had-
it used to be.
we had a whole day where, all right, get up here, Captain. Give me your elevator pitch, right? And it was a whole thing like sell. Hey, you're in an elevator for 30 seconds with someone. Sell what you do. And
That was at a selection or in the Q?
It was at the Q course.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so like it's kind of interesting. So if you kind of track with some of the not PSYOP history per se, but maybe of the last 10 years, you know, are we getting to MISOC? Are we not getting to MISOC? It's sort of these ebb and flow. Hey, we're MISO, now we're PSYOP, right? You can almost track injects into the Q course, you know, with with that history is interesting.
Yeah. So getting to the Q course itself, us in the room, we know that media upgrades faster than every 10 years. And what we say media, but that's just because like Will and I are kind of media guys. But like what PSYOP is at its core is a marriage of the sciences and the arts. So you have your sociology, your psychology, anthropology, et cetera, down the line. We have behavioral economic majors and mathematicians. And I mentioned the nuclear engineer. Like we have people who are the nerds on that level. But then you have like the arts, and you have your filmmakers like Will and like graphic guys like me and others in the force that are into like the arts. And
What if you're not creative or scientific, Ash?
well, there's also the ability to be adaptable, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's also an important point. Absolutely. Sometimes, especially as like an officer, right? We're both officers. If I'm making products myself on mission, am I using my team correctly? That's a question I always have to ask myself.
It's a hard one, yeah.
Because I'm an artist, right? I will want to roll up my sleeves and make art with my team. And sometimes the answer is for me to manage the art, not to make the art. And that's also something that is very much a nuanced job, a nuanced role that you can learn to do. There's plenty of failed movie directors in Hollywood who are now movie producers. But because they have that background and that education, because they wanted to be a director, they know how to talk to directors. They know how to talk to writers. I know how to talk to an artist and kind of get them onto the X that I want to get them onto without having to then also be the one who's doing all the work. And then if I'm managing 10 artists, oh man, I'm outputting more.
I think that's a real challenge, right? Is how do we bridge the gap between the sciences and the arts? And that's kind of where I think the best PSYOPers kind of sit in that space because they can swim in both circles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that maybe an argument for not necessarily changing, but looking at DSF ODAs? You know, they have their Bravos, Charlies, Deltas, and they all kind of have a specific sort of function. Is that an argument for PSYOP looking at something similar?
I like wrote my thesis on that, so I won't bore everyone, but I do believe that if we have to grow as a regiment in the future, we will have to figure out how to break off into separate MOSs eventually. I'm not saying it has to happen today with the force that we have now. I'm saying if we were to scale, we would need to compartmentalize some of what we need to do. Because right now, so I talked about how we're going off of some of our stuff from 2012. That's all being updated right now, and it has been since 2020. Everyone booted up the process, and it's starting to happen, and everything's being updated aggressively a lot, to the point where the Q course is changing every 3 cycles. There's new stuff, so that everyone who just graduated, in 1 year's time, it will be a very different course, and the next year after that, it will be a very different course. So it's hard to also kind of talk about the course in the context of today, because in 2 years it will not be the same, and that's good. I think that's a good thing.
It's a challenging thing too, right? Because I think people want, well, what's the difference between the SFQC, the CAQC, and ours? Well, someone brought this up in the office. I don't know if it was you, but you look at Ranger School, right? Ranger School has been, I'm sure it's changed, but the experience has been pretty much unchanged, right?
A ranger is a ranger.
Right, exactly. But for us, right? Like Twitter, like was invented like 15 years ago. Like that's it, right? And so that changes the whole landscape that we operate in. Cause
Even like 2005 YouTube, like I was into it back then.
Yeah.
It's very different than today's YouTube. Like you can even like see waves of YouTube or like prank videos. That's where it's at, man. Like those are gone now.
Yeah.
Like there's no prank videos anymore.
Yeah, it's content creators that have, you know, hundreds of thousands of followers on some niche topic, right?
Yeah, and like Facebook, the rage. But now if I'm like trying to target, I say target, but like if I'm like looking at a demographic in like America in marketing circles, I'm not looking at 18-year-olds on Facebook. If I am, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at like 40-something, 30-somethings, 40-somethings on Facebook. If that, because a lot of them are also on Instagram now. The devil's magic,
Like
TikTok.
See, in 2017, like memes, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
like we didn't make memes of our instructors because it just wasn't a thing that happened, right? But now it's like memes are such a part of the sort of cultural lexicon, right?
Yeah. It used to be like memes for years were like advice animals.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Click
Yeah,
on
yeah.
this image and now you can read the bottom. And before that, those were all based off of the motivational posters that everyone had, like
Yeah, that's right.
perseverance, you can do it. And then those evolved into demotivational posters which
Yeah.
were making fun of those, which then led to advice. Yeah, like memes, like just the life of
Right.
of that whole is like it's like inseparable, right? In any of like my command group chats and stuff, like there's always memes
Yeah.
and GIFs.
Yeah,
GIFs left and right.
Yeah, and it's like students will like, we'll see memes that they make, and like, this is I can't like acknowledge this. It's pretty good, you know. And like that wasn't a thing that existed 5 years ago. So we're getting people coming into the formation that can speak kind of in a different language.
To a point too, right? So here's an interesting aspect of that is something I tried to make sure I talked to the students when I could on the memes is they understand that they can write a sentence, right? They can write a meme, but they don't know how to get an effect from that meme.
Right.
And that's something that it's hard for them to get their heads out of that. They can write text messages and all this stuff, but they don't know how to make it work besides like pissing someone off. But that's not an effect. That's like an emotion.
Yeah. Well, the effect they want is they want you to laugh.
So here's the problem is when they then try to apply that to their operations.
Right.
And they don't know that it's not actually achieving anything. So you have to get them to get to that next level. It's something one of my friends, she's in a marketing firm. She's actually a reserve PSYOPer, right?
Right.
And so in her free time, she's a PSYOPer, and in actual her day job, she's working for a marketing firm that owns the contract for like these very big Fortune 500 companies. And something that she's mentioned to me is that they have these interns who are of that generation, and they're pulling them in and they're interviewing them saying, hey, do you know how to use Excel, and do you know how to do research and everything else? And they're saying yes, but they're not actually going through and doing it. So they're clicking on, their idea of doing research is clicking on the first page of Google, and they click all those links, but they don't go to the second page or the third page, and they're not looking at scholarly articles and all this other stuff. So they have like a whole green platoon thing that they've had to launch at their company to teach people who are digital natives how to properly use technology. Oh, that's an old special forces term where like green platoon was the platoon that trained everyone that came in.
Oh,
So as soon as you got to a special forces group, you would then go through the green platoon where even like the loggies and stuff would go through it so that they could understand what SF is and why they're there.
historical fact I should have known.
Take a shot, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
shot of coffee.
So then do you see maybe socially literate or social media literate students or going through the Q course and soldiers who maybe might excel a little bit, but then you also sort of mentioned that you're not quite getting the effect. So is it almost like an inflated? Do they look better than they really are just because they understand like the meme game or something like that?
I don't know. I don't think any of what I just said is like a bad thing.
Okay.
It's just a thing that we have to be aware of, where we often talk about like the newest generation because they were born within the internet, like in the matrix, that they somehow understand the matrix more. I think the fascinating aspect of the human experience is that all of us are kind of dumb and none of us really understand what's going on. And being able to be humble enough to admit that to ourselves is important.
Sure.
And sometimes being an older generation looking at the next one coming up, we can sometimes misunderstand what they understand. And we shouldn't look at digital natives as anything different from us. It's just the context and how they communicate is a little shifted. But at the same time, we still have to teach them these things, and we can't assume that they're going to understand it all coming in.
So can we talk about what what is being taught, at least broad strokes at like the Q course now, because we mentioned how it changes and how the students, again, there's so many different ways to skin a cat in this game. So how has it changed? Is it addressing these changing needs of the current information environment? What are your thoughts on that?
Will, as the current commander, do you want to initiate the stabbing of that?
Of course, right. One of the things that is interesting about whether it's you're talking about your life or the qualification course is that it's a pie, right? And if I want to put something in that pie, I got to take something back out, right? So we have a very, very lean 10-week course. It's fundamentals, right? It's target audience analysis. It's a 7-step PSYOP process. It's series development. It's face-to-face. It's all these things that you need to have like a good baseline on, right? And we have some of the best, most professional cadre who have done all the things there are to do in this career field, teaching it, and it's growing. Like we have like the most students ever right now. I get calls for help because the Wi-Fi is dying because we have so many people trying to ping in because we have so many students. The course has changed since I went through because we had the interagency planning course and regional studies, right, which has kind of been separated out and is now being fulfilled by the special warfare PSYOP course. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, in some ways.
Right. So what's kind of neat is that so my company stewards that 10-week course, and then we're still really in the kitchen trying to figure out how to get those two to hook together with Charlie Company, who then takes really it's our RSOF our RSOF students, takes them through the special warfare PSYOP course and takes them to that next level, gives them some of that SOF perspective on their job.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the more specific changes that have occurred in the last few years, current commanding general, General Roberson, received guidance from on high, but also himself identified requirements that he knew he wanted to support related to psychological operations. It's hard to complain from our foxhole right now. And we're about to send out a thing through HRC about all of the stuff that has happened since this changeover that we've been doing at SWIC. And it's a lot. It is a lot. So I won't say numbers. The classrooms are being redone. We're getting additional spaces for things. We're getting additional equipment for things, stuff and technology that is more in line with how we're being applied in the field. The stuff that the regiment is receiving as far as technological upgrades, we're receiving too right now. We're a part of that conversation, not so we can train our students on all this tech, but so they can be exposed to what's the realm of the possible. So some specific things is we often in the regiment would speak about how there's no social sciences being taught in the Q course. Well, now there is. Social sciences and human behavior is a block of instruction in the Q course to give that baseline of some of the sciences, right? And then there's also other aspects of that that are transitioning in the Q itself. Our exercise, we're relooking that to upgrade it to the next level, especially now that there's going to be an exercise at the end of the special warfare PSYOP course. So there's probably going to be an exercise at the end of the Q course and then another exercise at the end of the special warfare PSYOP course. That's the direction it's going. While the reservists are currently taking a distance version of the course, the officers are, that's in transition too. There are 3 reserve officers currently in this ongoing Q course with the intent of them graduating, hopefully, and then proving the concept of making eventually one pipeline for us, where a PSYOPer is a PSYOPer. The Special Forces guy is a Special Forces guy. So we want to also do the same thing.
Getting more reps in is at least one thing that also it sounds like is kind of a change a little bit. But I think it's also maybe one of the most important things that I sort of see is because I think it's hard for, PSYOP, our ultimate goal is we want to accomplish military objectives by changing, behaviors. But how do you do that, through reps? Sometimes the entire process that you mentioned, takes sort of a long time. So it might be a little bit harder to train. So seeing that more, I think, into the Q course, I think is awesome to see.
Yeah, and we're doing our best to see how we can include that more in the exercises as well in different capacities. Because you also want them to not just master the basics, but understand to some degree how the operational force functions so that they don't get married to too many things, too many of the wrong ideas. We don't want to create automatons that only know how to do something this way because right. Like we said in the beginning, the range fan of what we are is massive. We'll see that every cycle. Every cycle one of the most frustrating aspects for the captains is the lack of information they have going into the exercise. And we unfortunately do that on purpose for them, just because should we give them a level of information? Absolutely. But we don't want to feed them everything, because time and again, that's been my mission experience, is I usually don't have a lot of information. I'm usually told, go do PSYOP.
Would you say that that's maybe, because we've touched on it now a couple times, maybe one of the more important pieces of advice for people going through the qualification course is that concept of being comfortable with the uncomfortable?
Yeah. And here's the thing. When you graduate our course, or the Special Warfare PSYOP course, your education doesn't end there. When we grow up in life and become adults, we think all of a sudden we'll know everything. But what you realize is you're still the same person. You just know a little bit more, right? The education you will get either through codified training during PMT, so your pre-deployment training, essentially, leading up to a deployment, all the way through to your own self-development. It'll really take you far. Not a whole lot we can talk about on this net, I think, but Force PSYOP Group's doing a lot of really exciting things. So there's a lot to look forward to. Whatever niche you find yourself in, right? Whether you're kind of more of a techie PSYOP guy, more of a creative PSYOP guy, or maybe you're more of a communicating, producer, executive kind of PSYOP guy, there's a lot of really exciting opportunities.
Has there been one of those for you all in your time in PSYOP that, you both mentioned that you have this artistic sort of, natural flair anyways, but has there been parts of PSYOP that's just been, you go, oh, that was a great part. That's one of the things I love about PSYOP, that maybe these people who are still going through that process or are looking to go through the process might sort of go, man, I want that.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and see if I can articulate this in the right way. One of the things that I think SF has always excelled at is the ODA has an identity, right? And when I got to my PSYOP company out of the Q course, we were in an office building, and there wasn't a lot of identity there. But I was very close with a bunch of guys, a bunch of colleagues from my course who I graduated with, and so we all got on the same text chat. Shout out to the NSFW chat crew. And so that's been 5 years running, right? And what's neat about that is that I find identity in that chat group, because at one point, literally, I think we were all deployed all around the globe, and we would check in and say, hey, what are you doing over there? Is that working? Hey, can I borrow that con-op from you? And what you find is that no matter what culture, what TSOC, what mission you're doing, it was really a shared experience. And so I kind of had this moment as I'm sort of scrolling through, oh, he's here, he's there, he's there. That's pretty cool. That's where I find my identity at, right? Is that we are everywhere. It's evolved. They're all at ILE now. They're all into horology and expensive watches and all this stuff. So I'm looking forward to getting all those guys back so they can take command and kind of take the regiment to the next level.
That's a good point about identity in general. Not to keep tooting your horn there, but the Ghost of the Machine video, that wasn't the first thing that you made that was called the Ghost of the Machine. You had some really good pamphlets.
Some pamphlets.
Pamphlets and stuff. And you were experimenting with the idea of how do we identify ourselves as a regiment, and how do we start working on our brand? And something I've noticed in just the last 5 years has been at the detachment level, at the company level, at the battalion level, we are doing a much better job of that. There is some of our, I'm not trying to rag on anything, but some of our old symbols really resonate and still resonate today. And some of the old symbols that we kind of had in the regiment looked like they were made by committee. And it was one of those examples where there's this really good TED talk by the host of the podcast 99% Invisible, where he is on this TED stage and he goes through all these really amazing flags from countries and cities and everything, and all the really bad flags. And the bad ones are they're always trying too much. And when you look at the successful branding that we're starting to get now in the regiment, it's these simple ideas and these nuanced concepts, and looking at things like you mentioned, Loki, trickster gods. I've seen more than one trickster god as a symbol for a PSYOP organization, things like that, where it's what are we fundamentally? How do you even describe what we do? What is your elevator pitch?
Mm-hmm. That's right. The amount of swag I've seen just in the last couple of years has been outstanding. They're taking it to the next. They're taking it to the next level.
So that kind of gets to this point. You kind of said off mic before, Colin, where we were going over the past into the present, understanding who we are and stuff. And there was this time in the not too recent past where we were kind of getting called out as the masters of communication, and our recruiting's really down. Like, how are we supposed to say that we're the masters of influence if
Right.
we can't recruit?
Oh,
Right.
And it's like,
don't get me started.
yeah, so, well, there's a number of us, some in this room, who took that very personally because we were being criticized, and it was fair criticism. And so it was one of those, like a watershed moment, I think, for our entire regiment, because I think we're seeing at like the fundamental, like the grassroots level, many of us who are saying, you know what, challenge accepted. I'm going to fix it. And it's not like any individual PSYOPer who's like turning the whole thing around. It's a group of us. There's a lot of us, like all your buddies you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I mean,
it's a revolution.
Yeah. I think people are taking real ownership. I have seen it. So running the outreach team for a year, I am hypersensitive to the way we feel about ourselves, right? And cybers are a very, very interesting group of people. And so it's been really neat and sort of to capstone my time at PSYOP to do something to give back that would kind of unite the tribes. It's a tough job because you're all out in the open, and everyone thinks they know how to run those pages and how to do it right. And what you find is it's really difficult. It is tough. We have these outreach teams, right? You can do a lot with a little. As far as I've seen, the commanders are really empowering the teams to do podcasts, to do recruiting videos, to take chances on stuff that they might not have before. I mean, we are in the most swanky recording studio right now, are we not?
It looks really good.
I think we're giving the Joe Rogan Experience a run for their money. So
We got fake plants, we got lights. They're all good.
I think to caveat off of what you said,
Yeah.
Commander, there's this reality of what we do and the positions that we can take, where I have seen really people who struggle and they get into a position they're uncomfortable with in the cyber regiment, and they end up getting the evaluation that they probably deserve. And then force multipliers, like those individuals who decide that they're just going to own any position that they get. What's cool that I've seen in the regiment is, if you are passionate about this, if you're good at it, right, you've spent the time to hone yourself to get good at it, you can get any position and just crush it. Like these outreach positions, they can very much be like, man, I'm in the outreach cell, and I guess I'm just gonna do my time until I can get the next position, and I hope I just stay afloat and everything else. Or you can be, like a Will Lamb, and you crush it, and everyone knows your name now in the regiment because you've invested and you've spent the time and you've done everything. Like, all right, how can I justify more equipment for this section that's relevant to it, not just for the sake of? How can I actually do more with less? How can I get out there? How can I refine what's going on? How can I build this so that the next person that comes in is successful as well? Doing that level of work is something I've seen over and over again. And when we're doing it right, that's really how like all of our missions that are forward are successful too, is just doing the same thing, just putting in effort, caring, not just going out every night, taking what you have and being responsible for it, being an adult about it. That stuff matters. If you are that person, if you can do that and go out there and you can get a job as like a general's driver, and then you're like, you just crush it so hard that they're like, I don't think we could ever have another person like you. Like, if you're that guy, like, come on over to us. If you found a way to get AI tech involved in like your signal company in the conventional army, like, we want you, come over. Like, there's so many things. It's the personality, but there's also so many personalities that really benefit here.
that's great. That's really all I have. I want to thank you guys for coming on, taking the time to be able to come in and speak about some of these things, and just really grateful for your guys' service, for the examples that you're setting within the regiment, and again, love the fact that you guys are, I think, strategically situated in your current positions to really kind of take the next crop or next generation of PSYOPers and kind of make them even better than the last. So I appreciate it.
Awesome.
And thanks, Colin. Appreciate it, bro.
Absolutely. Love being here. Shout out to everyone who's listening. If you wanna help us, there's always a place at SWIC for anyone who's like super nerd on history. Are you a writer? Are you just passionate about teaching people about what we do? Did you go through the course and were frustrated with how it is? Like, then come back and help us make it better, because that's absolutely the direction. That's what we care about. And if you care about that too, then you're gonna do fine.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Hell
Thanks,
yeah, brother.
guys.